yoga friends. So I thought it would be interesting to take a look at Ustrasana, which is also known as camel pose. So you might recognize this thing that I'm drawing here. So camel pose is a back bend, obviously. So one of the things that we do when we analyze a posture for how we want to prepare for it is look at all of the parts that are going to be important to prepare for this pose. So we have this hinge happening at the hips, and the entire back is bending. And then also the shoulders are stretched back to reach for the feet. So we have a couple kind of main areas to look for: the shoulders and upper back, preparation for the spine for this deep back bend, and also the hips and legs. So even though the knees are bent in this position, there's quite a lot of strength in the hamstrings and glutes to keep you stable in this posture, as well as some general core strength. So I'm going to look at some poses that will be helpful to prepare for this big back bend and address these areas that are under particular stress in this pose. So one thing that we can do is look at this posture from a different angle. So here is camel pose. You are kneeling position, but what happens if you rotate it around? Oh, hey, that looks very similar to another posture. So a obvious preparation for Ustrasana is going to be Dhanurasana, or bow pose. So same position, you're reaching back for your feet, but in this position you are prone, you're on your belly. Okay, so here is an obvious preparation for that. And then we can break it down into kind of some of the fundamental categories. So let's say number one is hips, number one is shoulders and upper back, number two is the back in general, the spine, and this number three area is going to be the hips and legs. Okay, so let's look at number one, the upper back and shoulders. So we have this extreme external rotation of the arms in this position. And so one of the things that I like to do is to do some kind of arm sweep motion to prepare for this big reach back. So doing some really simple things in triangle pose, which is not even a back bend, right? But this lateral bend can help to prepare the shoulders if you start to introduce an arm sweep with this. So you go from triangle pose and you look down when your arm is back, and you look overhead at your arm when it comes forward. So that's an inhale and that's an exhale. And you can also bend your elbow behind your back, and that gives you even more of that external rotation in triangle pose. All right, so that's one thing. Another thing that's nice to prepare the upper back and shoulders, and it's a nice easy one to do, is a reclining twist of some kind. So in a reclining twist, if you work to keep your shoulders down on the ground, then you get this nice stretch in the front of the chest and shoulders, and a little mobility in the upper back. So again, this is a nice, pretty gentle warm-up for the upper back and shoulders. So those are a couple options of some simple things, pretty specific for the back and shoulders. And we can incorporate this same sort of arm sweep pattern in a bunch of different kinds of postures and transitions. So we'll revisit that pattern later on. Okay, and then let's take a look at the low back in general, or the spine in general. So let's just call this spine. So one of the things that we can do here is the what we like to call the flossing of the spine. So any of these prone back bends are going to be particularly helpful for strengthening the back, which is a big component of camel pose. So you'll start laying on your belly. And a great one for this one is going to be Shalambhasana with that arm sweep that we just incorporated in triangle pose here. So when you inhale, you'll sweep your arm around and up as you lift opposite arm and leg. So this is strengthening the low back. It's also strengthening the glutes and hamstrings as you lift that leg, and you get that shoulder mobility there. So even though this is predominantly for strengthening the back, it does address the upper back and shoulders, and it will also address the hips and low back. And same with Virabhadrasana. So Virabhadrasana is a very simple standing back bend. And at its easiest or simplest form, you start with straight legs, and then when you inhale, you bend your front knee and lift your chest and your arms into a back bend. And there's so many different variations in this. I would probably, if I were planning the sequence for a class, based on what I saw in the class, I would maybe choose a different arm variation for this one, depending on the kind of mobility that I see in my students' shoulders. So there's a version where you kind of move your arms open like a clock. And there's also a version, once you get into that standing back bend, to bend your elbows behind your head. And that can kind of give you that preparation for this bind of holding on to the feet. And so this position obviously also addresses the hips. So we'll also move on to, and the legs. So we'll look at the hips and legs next. So hips and legs. Oops, hips and legs. Okay, so we'll look at hips and legs next. So a great way to start a practice is with Dvipadapitam, and I think the rest of this yoga world usually calls this bridge pose. So this is a great one for activating the legs, so strengthening the hamstrings and glutes, and introducing a little bit of that back bend shape that will come in more complex back bends. And another great one is to do a kneeling lunge. So here again, I think oftentimes this gets a little bit more specifically and deeper stretch for the hips than Virabhadrasana also does. So this one can get a little bit more specific, and again, you can add in that elbow bend to start to stretch the arms and shoulders a little bit more to prepare for holding the foot. And then in fact, you can incorporate that foot bind in this pose. So you can reach back with one or both arms to hold on to that foot for a deeper back bend. And so once you've done that, then is a good time to do that Dhanurasana. That is a more direct preparation for Ustrasana for camel pose. So you can see how you can choose based on what you see here. Just even with the stick figure, you can identify the parts of the body that get the most stress to find simpler postures that will help prepare for this more complex one. And then you can also look at what parts of the body are undergoing the most stress in this posture to start to figure out things to compensate. So you have a really big back bend. And so I often call this compensation, but the rest of the yoga world also calls this counter poses. So we've done a lot of back bending in this practice. Obviously, you wouldn't necessarily need to use all of these things, but these are some simple ones that would be good to include in a practice. So because there's so much back bending, a good amount of forward bending is going to be useful. And so directly coming out of Ustrasana, child's pose is going to be helpful because it's a very simple forward bend. There's not really a tremendous weight bearing in this one, so it's a nice gentle stretch for the low back after that big back bend. And because your arms are bound in this position, they're in a fixed position, revisiting a reclining twist can help relax the neck and shoulders after being in that fixed position in this big back bend. And then, as I mentioned before, practice with deeper forward bends is going to be helpful. So Paschimottanasana, a seated forward bend with straight legs, is going to be particularly helpful. And of course, if there are other variations that you liked, there's no reason why doing a Janu Shirshasana or a butterfly style forward bend, if you wanted to add those in as well, that would be fine too. But I would say this is going to be the most beneficial counter pose after Ustrasana, and make sure a good time in a seated forward bend is going to be part of your practice. So if you'd like to see additional posture analysis, please feel free to comment below or send me an email. It's felicity@omchantress.com. And likewise, if you'd like to see some posture analysis of additional poses, let me know in the comments and I can draw up another one for you. And if you'd like to learn how to draw these stick figures, I do have a course available on my website, so omchantress.com, to learn how to draw yoga stick figures. Thanks for watching. Bye.